Welcome to another episode of the Grace Parents Podcast. So excited about today's episode. I'm on with my dad to talk about fatherhood and the difference between raising kids then and raising kids today. Tune in, lean in. It's a special Father's Day edition of the Grace Parents Podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the next episode of the Grace Parents Podcast, our special Father's Day episode. And I'm very happy and privileged to have with us today as our special guest, my very own dad. Dad, thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I think so. We've had many discussions over the years of our life together, but none quite like this. And I have a lot of questions, things to pick apart. I know I'm learning so much in my season of fatherhood, raising my three boys. You and Mom raised me and my three brothers, 4 boys, 4 sons, all grown, all married, all with kids of their own. I think my first question is, how in the world did you do that? 1 seemed impossible, two seemed insane, 3 is where we cut it off, but you guys went with 4. How in the world did you do that?
Well, you described it accurately. 1 is overwhelming, and you keep adding on. And it's the minute you're outnumbered that it really becomes a problem. And there's more kids than adults, and then it just kind of expands from there. But, our answer is God's grace. You do your best as a parent. You love as best as you know how to love. You train as best as you know how to train. We're Christians. We were in the church. We were trying to operate out of a Christian worldview. And because of that, we relied a lot on other people to kind of teach us and tell us what was going on. We were, disciples of James Dobson back in the day, focused on the family stuff. Who else? There were several teachers going on at that time that we would just kind of look to their books. Kevin Lehman, a black one on his name, Gary Smalley, a lot of these guys that were trying to help you grapple with this wonderful call and this incredible blessing that parenting is and kids are, but at the same time recognizing that God uses your children to teach you about yourself. And
that's one of the number one recurring theme of the podcast conversations is how this all comes back to your not just your faults and failures, but the areas of growth for you as an individual and as a parent. Now, you listed, a whole catalog of resources that you guys leveraged and used. So sounds like you went into this very prepared and ready to go. Is that what you would say? Did you feel like you were prepared and ready to be a dad with all of this resources and all of this knowledge and all these people in your life? So
as people know, I was a school psychologist for 30 years. So I had come out of graduate school, got married, and a few years, 3 or 4 years later, we started having our children. So I had all kinds of head knowledge, but I didn't really have the emotional IQ at that time. And partly because I never really had a father figure relationship in my life. People know my story. My parents divorced when I was 8 or 9, and didn't see my father again for 24 years after that. My mother remarried, and then that man died. He adopted us. And so I never really had an ideal father figure relationship in my life. So I became overwhelmed very quickly because I realized that there's this whole emotional component to fathering that is something I'd never experienced. It was something I didn't really know. I'd always been attracted to coaches and other men, teachers that I would emulate or get close to kind of understand leadership and kind of how you work with people and stuff. And that was very, very helpful, very, very good. But when a 2-year-old's screaming at 3 a.m, none of that training and that mentoring really helps. No, it doesn't help because you're in the midst of the fire. You're in the grinder. You're in this point of parenting where it's like, okay, are you in or you out? Are you committed to this? Are you going to walk it out or not? And so I think God really taught me faithfulness and fortitude and And, sometimes it's not pretty. It's often not pretty, but you got to, kind of dig in and look for grace and hang in as best you can. So, I would say intellectually, I thought I was ready for parenthood, but after a few kids, I realized I had very little idea about what I was doing.
Yeah. I share that experience as well. Now, I want to talk about one thing real quick. There's a lot there to come back to, but, I know for a lot of people, the lack of a role model in the household, growing up without a dad, has really caused, we talk about, we live in almost like a fatherless generation where it's very common to grow up in a broken home where your dad's not a part of the picture or your mom's not, and the issues that brings, because you don't have the example. You kind of skews your view on family. There's always kind of, especially as kids, you don't even know the way that affects you emotionally, mentally, spiritually, often until many years later. A lot of work to undo there. Now, I would say, as the recipient of your parenting and knowing my brothers who are all successful, well-adjusted, for the most part, they all love God, amazing wives, every one of them married up, great kids who we love. And yet, and I would say that I thought you did a great job as a dad, yet knowing your story, you didn't have the example. So for those who might be in a similar situation, what advice or counsel would you give to them from your story of how you overcame the hurdle of not really having a dad in the picture and then raising 4 sons to become, I think we're doing a great job as dads. At least we're doing the best job that we can. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very simple. Jesus.
Yeah.
I know it's simplistic. Yeah. It's like the old joke, but the reality is, without Jesus kind of walking this through with your mom and I, we never would have made it. It just wouldn't have happened, but we were committed to a Christian worldview in raising our children. And even within our limitations or our expectations or just our ineptitude sometimes, by pursuing Christ and understanding that he would fill in. He would fill in the places where we were short, where we were weak, where we failed, to the point that what you would see, our goal was for you to see Jesus in our parenting and understand that there were biblical bases for the decisions, the restrictions, the rewards, the things that we did were biblically based, because that's what God says, this is how you'll live a good life. Now, that doesn't mean that people didn't have problems and nobody's perfect in life, well, except you. You were pretty perfect. But for most people,
thank you.
You're always going to encounter problems. The Bible says in this world you'll have tribulation, right? So you're going to have struggles. It's part of the refining process that God uses in us. But I really think it's seeking Jesus and trying to have his character manifested in you, because that's what people ultimately remember. I tell the story all the time about I grew up very competitive in sports and academics and everything, and I was going to be the best and I was going to win everything, and became a Christian. And of course, that's kind of opposite of what Christ teaches, which is to be the servant of all, the greatest of all, humble yourselves and therefore be these kinds of things. So I would struggle with that. And I was quite happy that, after I was saved a few years, and I think I was still in graduate school at the time, I think, man, I really overcome this. This is great. And at a college career age picnic, a bunch of us were playing football, just touch football out in the backyard area there. And I'd say within 5 minutes, I'm nose to nose with another guy ready to fight over a call, And it was like God convicted me at that moment so strongly to say, oh, really? You think you figured this out? Right. You think you've got the walk down? And so that was kind of, and that was before I was even married. So that kind of helped shape my return to humility frequently. Yeah. To say, okay, I thought that's what was going to happen. I thought that was the best way to do something, but it didn't really. Okay, I see. I was wrong there. I was too strong, or I was too vague. So my point is, it's a constant learning process. And Lynn and I used to say this in the marriage classes there at Grace when we were there, that unless you choose proactively to do something different, you will replicate what you saw in your household growing up.
So good.
Maybe good.
So good.
But definitely the bad will follow you, because you don't know anything else. When
Yeah.
It's 2 a.m. and your kid's crying. You start screaming at your spouse, why aren't you helping me? Why aren't you, whatever the situation is, that pressure brings out what's in there. And what's in there for most of us was, the default is a worldly view of things.
Yeah. Yeah. What, unless you proactively choose to do something different, you will default to what was there before, or what you grew up with, or what you've seen.
What your family did, what your parents did, typically, I would say.
After we had Logan, our first, and going through that experience of the first few months, some of our friends got pregnant with their firsts. I was talking to the husbands, and they were asking for advice and stuff. And the number one thing that I had to say at that time, and I'm going to ask you about how you navigated it, was I told them, the pressure and the stress of having a newborn baby, especially the first one, the sleepless nights, all the that is going to squeeze out of you stuff you didn't know was in you. So get with God now, have him search your heart, and begin working on that stuff that's deep down, because it's going to come out. And you don't want that to come out on your family. You want to be, have something good be produced in you in this season. Although parenting, like marriage, is one of the greatest things that lead us to sanctification because of that.
That's right.
So from your lens, and I feel this as well, we talked about the emotional maturity wasn't there. And so things get squeezed out of you in this. So talk to me about how you navigated that process of becoming more emotionally mature over the years, and what God did in you to help you get to a better place.
Well, after we had, I think, 2 kids, and then maybe when we had 3, my joke used to be, it was very easy to get up and go to work every day. It was hard to come home at night.
Right.
Because, mom would be exhausted dealing with the little kids, and I'd have to jump in there and take over so she could get a break and do stuff. But the idea of leaving the house early to go to work, with the pressure that was going on with having little kids, that was pretty tempting. I mean, that's obviously my flesh, and obviously, not a godly answer, but that was the reality.
But that's true. It's real.
You run to comfort. You run to taking care of yourself. I mean, I'd say for me, it was really selfishness, wanting things my way, wanting to do what I wanted to do. That was the biggest thing to overcome. Even though I loved you guys, I loved my Linda. I mean, it was not like I didn't like people or anything like that, but my flesh would just rebel against, having to put all these other people first in what was going on. So I think my maturity began when I recognized that, and then I began to see that was part of what was going on for me, and that the fruit of that was not going to be any good if I continued to kind of battle against it. It's not good for my marriage. It's certainly not good for a relationship with the kids. Although young kids don't get it. They're not aware. I mean, they know if people are fighting or somebody's not there. But really, the most parents, and I had a conversation with one of the young pastors here that I work with, and he was concerned about his kids. His kids are like 5 and 3. That he needs to spend more time with them, and he's in ministries and all this stuff. And he doesn't want to let them down. And I said, whoa, stop beating yourself up. Your 3-year-old's happy to see you whenever he sees you. You're not traveling for weeks at a time. You're just talking about, you've got demands and this and another thing, and you're preoccupied with stuff. I said, kids are incredibly resilient. And God's grace is manifested there. So even if we screw it up a few times, His grace is okay. His grace is sufficient. It will fill in the gap.
Yeah.
One other thing about the emotional maturity, the other big lesson I learned, and this may have been from Dobson, is if you want your children to recognize when they're wrong and accept responsibility for it and seek forgiveness, you need to do the same thing. When you blow it as a parent, you need to, when you become aware of it or confronted with it, say, "Oh my gosh, you're right. I didn't mean it that way," or I wasn't thinking about what you've done. Whatever it is, would you forgive me for not being aware, not tuned into what you were needing, or for saying that in anger or whatever. That is the greatest model of repentance, forgiveness, restoration, which is what the Bible is all about. That's the greatest model in a family that I think any parent can give.
Yeah. That's This has been something that I feel like I've been taught early on in parenting, and I'm grateful for that, is building that relationship of trust with your kids, modeling repentance, modeling forgiveness, even at a young age, so that they can see that and feel that. And I think that produces such great levels of trust and intimacy with your kids. At least that's my hope, is what it's doing. But more than that, I think it goes back to kind of the first thing we talked about, which is like building a Christian worldview for them, giving them a framework by which they can live in that makes sense, that provides security, that provides a sense of safety, yet is also clear on these are the ways we behave and these are not the ways that we behave. Talk to me about some of the things you and Mom did intentionally to form a Christian worldview in the household.
Well, a great place to start is talking about boundaries. Biggest place of contention as kids get older. What are you limiting their behavior? What are you telling them they can do or can't do? Setting boundaries. Children want boundaries because they want to know what's safe and what's not safe. And so when kids don't have boundaries, they pursue till they run into a boundary.
Right.
So as a parent, you're providing a safe environment, biblically based, of course, on what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior. And one of the things I've heard you do with your sons is in correcting them, explaining that this is not how God wants us to behave.
Right.
And making it a spiritual overlay of it. This is not what Christians do. And that is appealing to a higher authority, really. And so a lot of our boundaries, and this is part of my clinical training, but boundaries have to have a reward and a consequence to be effective. And what I always try to do is clearly state the consequence at the beginning for breaking the boundary.
Yeah.
And clearly identify the reward or the positive for maintaining the boundary or the rule or the limit or whatever. That way you're teaching the child to make a decision. When they get to that boundary, and the boundary is don't go out of our yard, or you're going to be restricted to the house for 2 days or whatever, stay in your yard and we'll go for a long walk afterward, right? Kid comes up to that fence and the gate's open. Now he has a chance to think about it. Do I want to get stuck inside for 2 days? Or do I want to wait and have a walk with my dad? Now that's not going to work with a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, obviously.
Right.
But as kids get older, though, you're teaching them decision-making that is applicable in the world the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah. So that just triggered, I'm going to get into some family stories. Things that I remember. Now, I was the youngest, so let me ask you this question first, and then I have some memories that maybe you can clarify or you can share your perspective on.
It never happened.
Yeah, exactly. Certainly, I'm the youngest of 4, so my experience, and maybe this is a question, but I think it's a pretty safe assumption. I think my experience was probably very different than my oldest brother's experience, David, growing up. And I know that just from having 3, as you learn and as you mature and as you grow, as you get an understanding of like, oh, this is how a 2-year-old behaves. You don't have to be mad about that. It's what they do. Right. Versus this is how a 5-year-old can think, or now like a 7-year-old. And so you're just learning, you're getting better. Talk to me about how different the experience was as you moved from 1 to 4.
Right. So for most people, we say that the firstborn is the guinea pig.
Right.
It's where you try out your ideas. It's where you mess up your plans, where you try to recover from that. And the firstborn is living all of this with varying degrees of distress and frustration and inconsistency. So maybe you do a little bit better with the second one because now you're seeing, okay, well, I realized that wasn't the way to go. I needed to do this. But the second one's looking at the first one as well and going, okay, is he getting away with that? Or what is he doing? How is he responding? So the more kids you have, the more they learn from each other. And if there's consistency, we always said that the youngest becomes the easiest because they're less likely to challenge the norm, not totally unlikely, but less likely because they see their older siblings reinforcing it because they're not running out the gate of the yard down the street because they know the consequence of that. So the youngest child typically wouldn't. So if you're number 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, you tend to learn a lot from the older kids. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. I mean, it's just depending what kind of behavior the kids have. But as a parent, I always felt it was important to be consistent. Now, a little side note on this. That sounds easy, but there's 2 people parenting. And having agreement between mom and dad is not easy sometimes. And the good cop, bad cop thing doesn't work with children. It really doesn't work because they see through it pretty quickly, but it sounds like the good cop is undermining the bad cop. And what you want is both parents to have the same agreement on what the limit is or what the rule is or what the consequences of the reward is.
Good.
Not otherwise, you've got kids going from one parent to another. Dad, can I go out in the yard? No, I don't think so. It's a little too cold. Mom, can I go out in the yard? Yeah, get out of here. Get out of here. But wait a minute. You just undercut dad or, mom saying no TV, dad coming in, turning on the TV. There has to be communication between the parents for consistency. And that takes work. That takes proactive thinking and planning, talking, connecting to be consistent with it.
Yeah, that's so good. I have a whole trail of questions I want to ask, but I know that mom would kill me for going down that track without her present to represent her interests. So, mom, for you, I'm going to spare you that because she'll go, I want to correct that because.
Another podcast.
Yeah,
that's parenting podcast.
That'd be a fun one.
We'll get her on.
That'd be a fun one. But yeah. Okay, so let's actually talk about that because I did have some questions about parenting in a household with mom, with your spouse. How did you guys handle conflict with the kids, with each other? I think my ultimate question that I want to ask that you can answer in any direction is how did you make it work with mom in this season? In the season specifically of 4 kids in the house, we were all within 7 years of each other.
7 years.
So 4 kids in 7 years, lots going on in different seasons. High school, certainly people are traveling all over the place. We all played sports. We all did activities. You guys both worked at different times in different seasons, coaching, refereeing. Like how'd you do it? How did you make it work with mom specifically? What were some rules or things that you guys had in place, some priorities?
Yeah. Forgive first.
Yeah.
Give grace second.
Yeah.
And then be merciful.
Listen, that's good advice. Yeah.
It's hard. It's really hard because when life is going fast and, mom stayed home with, after Dave was born until you started kindergarten, I think. And then she went back to work. So she was home for like 10 years or something like that, doing full-time mom stuff and then working part-time, doing some different things. So, I had to be very careful not to come in from working all day and not really recognize what the dynamic was that she'd been dealing with and then start giving orders or making decisions kind of out of context. Right. And I did that plenty and I learned the hard way that doesn't fly, right?
That's great.
So we used to say that, we always did a date night once a week. I mean, just even if it's just going out for coffee, just to do something to get out and give us a chance to catch up about the kids, but it would also give us a chance to reconnect our relationship and talk about things that we're thinking about or plans coming up or things we want to do or problems that we're facing. Because if you have a lot of kids, your time is stolen. Yeah. I mean, it just, and maybe stolen's the wrong word, but it's full of good things. But your relationship with your spouse is what suffers. And if you're a single parent, that's even compounded because you don't have that release. You don't have that extra shoulder to lean on and talk with. And it becomes even more challenging. So it's just a lot of grace and a lot of mistakes, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of coming back to it and trying to do it again because you're learning.
Yeah. And
every kid is different, by the way. All 4 of my sons are incredibly different from each other. And that's not unusual. That's the norm. So they grew up in the same house, same parents, same neighborhood, same rules, same exposure to church and Christianity, and everyone's different in their own way. Well, that's because God makes each of us unique. And so we don't have, automatrons. We don't have kids that are just, duplicates of each other.
What was your favorite season of parenting? Like, what age range, when you look back, was for you the fondest memories, the most joyful time?
Honestly, I think like 7 to 9 or 10, because their kids are fully functional. They're starting into activities. They aren't into the teenage separation process yet. They're able to talk to you about stuff, and they're just fun to be around, fun to do stuff with. So I think for me, a lot of it, that's youth soccer or times when people are doing stuff. And that's always, to me, that was always the fun age.
Yeah, that's great. What season was the hardest for you? Looking back, was just the most challenging?
It's tough. I think babies are really tough. Having small children who can't express themselves, who don't understand what who don't reason, they don't think abstractly. They're just about them in the moment, the urgency, what they want when they want it, kind of thing, is hard. It's just really, really hard. Yeah. The teenage years are probably more wild because things are always on the verge of being out of your control. But that's normal. That's how it's supposed to be for teenagers. They're supposed to be more independent. They're supposed to be making decisions and testing things for themselves. But that's hard because you also realize you're losing influence. You're losing, in a sense, control as kids get that older. And then honestly, that's when you begin to think, did I do a good enough job? Did I really teach them what they need to know? Are they going to just get messed up because of something I did or didn't do? And it's a different. You see eternity in a sense. You see the future greater with them. But the toughest is the babies, really, because they're totally dependent on you.
Yeah, I remember talking with Pastor Brett one time, and he talked about having those like early teenage years were his favorite. For a lot of parents, it's a hard season, and it was hard in its own right. But that gave me a lot of hope, because at that time, that was a few years back, I was like, I love my kids. I love being a dad, but little ones are hard for the reasons you mentioned, like specifically for the reason they can't express themselves. They can't communicate. They're not behaving rationally. They're behaving emotionally. And so for me, I've always felt like at a lack in providing anything of substance that was hopeful. I just always felt confused and always kind of felt on my back foot. We had lots of fun, of course, but in those moments where there's conflict or something, I always felt like I don't know what to do. No words, seem to help. But I actually want to talk about the teenage years for a minute. What would you say to parents of teens right now who feel what you're feeling? They kind of feel like they're losing control. They kind of feel like their kids are maybe drifting away from them a bit more. And the feelings that can bring of what you just said. Did I do a good enough job? Will I ever get them back? Are they really like leaving me? Can you speak just some perspective and some hope, some expectations perhaps for the teenage years?
Well, the thing I used to say when I was, working in the schools was, this is normal. They're in a process of separation and individuation. They're becoming people, their own people. And they're not there yet, but, certainly by the age, I used to say, and I don't know if I would still say it now, but I used to say, your influence is done by 16. After that, your goal should be to be friends. That doesn't mean you don't discipline or you don't hold consequence. I'm not saying that, but our great goal was to be, when our sons became adults, that we'd be friends with them. Not great parents, but adult friends, right? So that was our goal. But during the teen years, that's where rewards and consequences, I think, are critical, because these are where kids are making decisions, and they need to know how it works. They need to know how the world works. And, I'm happy you think you know how to drive a car. You don't have a license yet. So if you go out and drive a car, here's your consequence. You're not getting a license because the court's going to say, no, you can't have a license, right? So that's the reality of it. But I think a lot of teens that get in trouble that I've worked with over the years don't really comprehend the consequences of their actions or even the impact of their actions. So, I'm not a militaristic dictator about that, because that doesn't work either. But you have to be clearly communicating expectations, and you may remember this, but I told all of you guys that as long as you guys had A's and B's in school, I would not be in your business at all. I wouldn't be checking with your teachers. I wouldn't be calling your counselor to check up on you. If you took care of your business, then that's what I expect.
Great.
And if you did that, then I'm out of it. I don't need to be in it because you're handling it, right?
Yeah.
And that was true for all four of you. Everybody did. Everybody took care of it and did a great job about it. So that's the example there is to say, I've empowered you by giving you a reward and a consequence, an expectation, right? You bring home a D, I'm at school. Mm-hmm. Right? We're sitting down with that teacher and we're working out a plan for remediation or whatever, right? You got A's and B's? Well, then I got nothing to say about that. I accept congratulations. Way to go.
And that, that I speak for myself, build such a degree of independence, of self-confidence, of maturity and autonomy, which I think has served, at least again, just for me, served me well for the rest of my life, to feel like I don't have to rely on mom and dad to get things done in my life. I've learned that I can do that myself. And I remember there's times where I came in and I needed help and I needed some guidance, and you guys were there for that. But those are those, little things that make a really big impact later in life, but I also know require a lot of self-discipline from mom and dad to navigate.
Right. And this is really where many Christian parents miss the mark, in my opinion. They remain over-involved, try to be over-involved through the teen years. And what that does is force the teenager to push harder to separate, to get away. So their behavior becomes more extreme, or they seek a more extreme experience as something their parents wouldn't follow them to. And so it's important for parents, just you described it, we're trying to teach self-confidence, autonomy, decision-making skills, things that are going to lead to success in life. But if a kid feels like their parents always on them, always in their business, always following them around, watching where they're going, showing up, that's smothering. And so most adolescents, their reaction to that is to push away harder. I got to get away from this.
Okay, so I have a memory of a very creative system which you and or mom devised to enforce curfews in the house. I'm going to ask you about that story, but my bigger question is, thinking back, what were some of your most creative either punishments or risk reward conversations as you think about like things that you guys did? Now, I know for me, I was a dream. I was an angel. There was no problems there.
Pretty much, yeah.
I know for a few of my brothers that story is a little bit different. I know they took some creativity in navigating. So I'll give you a chance to think about that. But I remember back when we had curfews, having to be in the house by a certain time. And I know that some people were not great about holding to the curfews. And so I have a memory of on the just kind of sideboard table at the top of the stairs. So for our house, to paint you a picture, we had a split level. You'd come in, you stairs up or stairs down. So at the top of the stairs going up, there was a table. And I remember on those Friday or Saturday nights, there'd be an alarm clock on the table set to whatever time curfew was. And if that alarm was not turned off by the time, it would go off and alert everybody in the house that you had now missed curfew. True story? Did I hit that right or miss it, or is it somewhere in there?
That's pretty much true.
Yeah.
That's pretty much true. Yeah.
I love that.
And that was the old, it sounds like it's such a simple rule, right? I mean, it sounds simple, but you wouldn't believe the negotiating that would go on about that with the call at 5 minutes of 11. Hey, I'm stuck over here. I've got to take this person home first and got to do that. I'm really late. And I would say, I don't think I ever said it to you. I said, that's really too bad. I'm sorry to hear that. So we'll see you when you get home. And no, you're not going out tomorrow night.
Yeah. Yeah.
And miraculously, I'd say half the time they would show up within 5 minutes to meet the curfew.
Really?
Right? Because it was a negotiation.
Oh, yeah.
Now I've got a flat tire. I'm out on the highway. I'm trying to get the tire changed. I'm sorry. That's different. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making a decision. Well, I'm going to run this person home and then this person home, and then I'll be home. No, well, that's fine, but that means you'll miss your curfew, which is, not going to be good for you type of thing. The most creative thing that I thought we came up with was we used to travel in this big van, 4 kids, and we'd go to the beach, or we were taking this trip up to New York State, and we gave everybody a roll of coins and quarters, dimes, nickels, depending who you were, what your age was. And the game was, it was kind of a game. If you had to be corrected, every time you had to be corrected, you had to pay one of your coins back to us, right? And so there's a psychological term for all of that, which I'm going to skip over. But the idea is, I'm going to give you $10 of whatever it is, of dimes or whatever it is, and you can have them, spend on anything you want. But on our trip, if you're punching your brother, if you're arguing, if you're not behaving, it's going to cost you a dime. And so one of your brothers lost 30 cents in the first 15 minutes until he figured out what was really going on.
Now, was that 30 cents of nickels or 30 cents of dimes? Because that make a big difference.
Dimes. It's 30 cents of dimes. Yeah, sorry, good point. But they all of a sudden, I get how this works now, So there's just different ways to be creative. I mean, when you're traveling like that, you can't, send everybody to timeout or that type of thing.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. I think one of the things that I have seen with my boys that I know was in our family as well, they are very sharp, very quick. They're like little masterminds. They see all the little gaps. They know how to navigate them. Like he's 7. Like it's in 5. Like they're not teenagers. They're little, and they've kind of figured out the game, and they know how to listen carefully for which words I say and don't say. And so I always felt like you and Mom, kept up with us in that, and it was always these little, not back and forths, but I think negotiations is like a really good word. Everything feels now at least like it's a negotiation. And so I've kind of erred on the side of, so I'll make it a negotiation as well. So if you want something, almost whenever you want something, I'm going to ask for something in return to try to even the playing field. What did you see about that with us growing up? But then more specifically, advice and guidance for parents who find themselves in that place with a child or children who are always trying to test the boundaries, push the limit, get an extra thing, always kind of coming in with an excuse, always trying to kind of get around it. Like, how would you encourage them to navigate those types of conversations?
Well, 2 things come to mind. One is that's what really smart kids do, because that's what really smart people do, right? They figure out the system that they're in, the job they're in, the school, or whatever. And that's not a bad thing, that they're aware, that they're figuring out that type of thing. What I think, and you'll remember this, what we used to say was about chores, for example, household chores. We didn't pay for chores. We said chores were part of your responsibility as a member of the community.
Yes.
I remember. If you want to eat, we have, food, and you can partake of the food because you're part of the family. You're part of the community. But emptying the trash is another job within the community that's necessary, because we can't just keep stacking trash up in the kitchen. And so what we're trying to teach there is your responsibility. You have responsibility. So I'm not asking you to do the trash and that's demeaning to you.
Right.
And I don't want you to act like you're too good to do the trash, because that's a dark road to go down, for distortions of what your value really is.
Right.
But at the same time, we would give allowances and have a list of particular goals for the week of things that needed to be done. Did you get your bed made every day? Did you get your homework done every night? Things that are just part of it. But cleaning the bathroom or vacuuming the rug or taking out the trash, feeding the dog, picking up the yard, picking up the playroom. Those are just responsibilities that as a member of the community. And those aren't negotiable. I mean, there's no negotiation because, did you not want to have dinner tonight? Because maybe I just won't fix dinner, right? I mean, that's extreme example.
Well, just to apply the logic, which is I don't want to do it. Well, listen, I don't want to. I remember I talked to my kids about that because, they want to stay in the house and do stuff at home. They don't want to go to Wegmans or the store. But I go like, listen, guys, I don't want to go either. I don't want to grocery shop. You think I'm looking forward to this? But do you want to eat tonight? Yeah. Well, then we have to go to the store, and I would like company with me. Like, would you come and help me? And then it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. But that whole community mindset, I still remember that. And that's just something for me, at least, that was really powerful and really stuck with me, that it kind of worked against that individualistic mentality, which is this family exists to serve me and my needs. And mom and dad exist to serve me, and my brothers or my sisters are there to help me, and everyone is at my disposal. And changes that, which is, by the way, the natural bent of our hearts, right? With this selfish design that everything in my sphere points back to me. And so we are learning as parents you have to, if what'd you say? If you don't intentionally make a decision to do something different, so if you don't intentionally work against that, that's going to be produced, and that's going to walk with them the rest of their lives. And so we're always now pulling back the same language to this family is a community. There's not, and I think we say things like, no one here is the most important part of the family. We're all important in the family. And so we're here to serve each other, to help each other. And we're trying to wire that in, because anywhere else you go in life, if you behave that selfishly, you're going to find yourself very lonely and out of a lot of jobs, because that's not a...
And it isn't that biblical community. I mean, that's biblical community is what you're describing there, whether it's a small group or a church activity or event or a family. It's really God's model of community, of humility, serving one another, of interdependence, and all the things that you read about in Acts in the early church. You really talk about this community. Yeah. And if we can impress that upon our children in the family setting, I think that gives them a big heads up. And one other thing I wanted to mention on this is, I'm sure your children have never said this, although I believe I've heard them say that. That's not fair.
Yes.
Right? Right. And what would I say if one of you guys said that? I said, do you remember what I used to say when you'd say that's not fair?
I mean, what comes right to my mind is life's not fair.
That's exactly what I would say. What gives you the impression life is fair?
Yep.
Why would you think that? See, it's wrong thinking. You see, we live by grace.
Yeah.
So grace isn't fair.
That's right.
I don't deserve it. I live by grace, right? So that's not fair is all about self.
Yeah.
It's not fair because it's not what I want. Well, he got more than me. That's not fair. So you're really just worried about you. You're not worried about your brother or your sister, right? Yeah. So those are the kinds of secular worldview positions or factors or issues that come out with kids that, from a Christian worldview, you really have to address it directly.
Yeah.
And just to say, hey, life's not fair, but God is faithful.
So that part, because, I listen to your words through the context of my generation's culture, which is like, to say things like that might be mean or might not be very hopeful or might be too corrective. But I hear it in a twofold lens. One, our job as parents is to equip and train our children to live in the actual world later. And I don't think we do a disservice to present a picture that is untrue, as though they're going to go out and find that people cater to their needs. That almost never happens. But secondly, and this is where I think where most people miss the conversation, is that they miss the opportunity in those things to point to the grace and the goodness of God. And, we're reading this Paul David Tripp book on parenting, and he talks about how it's a grace of God that he gives us thousands of moments every single day with our children to point back to him, his love, his goodness, our need for him, the sin that's in our hearts, our need for forgiveness, how we need a rescuer, how God's authority is good. Like we have moments almost constantly to always point our children back to the true Father, to the good Father. And what happens is we usually miss those because we're caught in our emotional immaturity, we're caught in our feelings, we're caught in our desires, our frustrations, and we just miss these moments. But I love what you said about, not allowing that just to make you feel bad, but allowing that to allow you to trust Jesus to fill the gaps and to cover the places. Like there's no perfect parent anywhere. Nobody.
That's right.
And there never
right.
will be. And that goal that you're going to raise these perfect children is just absolute nonsense. But you have to trust Jesus to fill the gap. So I have a question on that, and then we'll wrap up here. Lest everybody think we had the most perfect family in the world. You raised 4 perfect boys who never had any challenges, never had any issues. All of us did in different ways, some big, some small, some recurring, some one-offs. When you think about some of the more challenging seasons, when one of us or a few of us were going through some things, and that I'll leave it generic because I'll let you speak to whatever it might be, but could have been periods of rebellion, periods of just really bad decision making, behavior that was just like way off base, or those types of things. When you found yourself in those seasons, how did you get through them? And how did you, like, what did you and mom actively do to walk through what I'll just call like periods or seasons of rebellion in your kids? And that doesn't even necessarily mean rebellion against you, rebellion against God, or just the very common sin nature in all of us. How'd you navigate those and get to the other side?
Well, I'll just finish with what I started. The way I started, Jesus.
Yeah, come on. Genuinely.
What we did actively was pray together.
Yeah, great.
We interceded in those situations. We prayed and prayed and prayed. We just asked the Lord to move. We asked Jesus to be real. All of you accepted Christ young, in your grade school, middle school age ranges of things. So we knew you knew the Lord. You knew you'd grown up with the Lord. You had a understanding of who God was. Rebellion is normal. Rebellion happens. Mistakes, although we don't desire them, they happen. Right. And it's just part of learning. No one learns flawlessly. We learn by failing sometimes, and sometimes those are the best lessons. But I would say for your mom and I, what we did was we would just stop and pray together. Yeah. We'd start praying and just really bring it before the Lord. We would confess our weakness, our inability to, turn this thing around, the song says. Mm-hmm. But ask for a confidence and a perspective in us that would allow us to, minister like Christ would minister.
Yeah.
Right. Except for the Pharisees, Jesus was pretty much loving and clear with people. Mm-hmm. He wasn't demanding and yelling at people about stuff, even the grossest of sinners. So, I know for some parents, and I would say I struggle with this a little bit, when my children were having problems, I often felt in my pride that it was going to be embarrassing to me, or that people would think less of me because of what my kids were doing. And that's got to go before the Lord, because that's really something being brought up that has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you continue to make it all about you, and it happens in reverse. Some parents are so proud of their kids. They tell them about everything. They push them to excel and succeed. And they see that as the product of good parenting. The product of good parenting, in our opinion, and what literally we were talking about, is well-rounded, Christ-following, successful adults. Right? Everybody had their particular interests and skills in music and sports and acting, drama, whatever. But it was always in balance. We had the rule you could only play one sport at a time, because one of our children wanted to play 2 sports, and we did it one season. And we said, that's it. That's crazy. We're not going from one game to another. Yeah, and it wasn't you, of course. But these are the things that as parents you're learning as you go along. But, you have to look ahead. And that's the last thing I'll say is you can't just look at the moment, because the moments get overwhelming. Mom had the best line. She goes, the years go fast, raising kids, the years goes fast, but the days are so slow.
True.
Right? Mm-hmm. The days are where you're grinding it out, dealing with all the things, but don't lose sight of what's going on down the road, because it goes fast. I mean, everybody, I know you've heard that, but my oldest grandson is 17.
I can't believe it.
which I held him after his birth. I mean, and now he's, going to college in a year and that kind of thing. So, so these are the kind of perspectives I think as parents we need to keep. Yeah, today's hard and tomorrow may be hard too, but think ahead, look at where you're going. Don't lose sight of the goal.
Dad, thank you so much for this time. I love this conversation. So much more we could talk about. Tell Mom I love her. Tell Mom I said hey. Okay. Thank you all for listening, for tuning in, for hanging with us for a little bit. If this episode encouraged you, blessed you, if you got something out of it, share it, post it, put it somewhere that you can put it in the life of somebody else who might be able to grow and glean from it. As we say, you can't do life alone. You can't do marriage alone. You certainly cannot do parenting alone. We are here for you. And we hope that this is encouraging and blessing you, finding Jesus in the gaps of your parenting. Dad, love you. Thanks for being on the show.
Love you, AJ. Talk to you soon.